the new COVID economy, how today's stimulus will destroy tomorrow's society. I'm going to explain this to you in 3 simple, fast steps. Step number 1, let's go over the basics of a healthy economy. It starts right here with our good friend, Farmer Fred. And he has this little plot of land where he grows cotton, corn, wheat, and raises some cattle. Well, he starts off with just manual labor. He's got this tool. It's some sort of hoe or shovel. I'm not sure, but it's better than using his hands. But then he produces more than he consumes. And because of that excess production, he is able to save purchasing power. With that purchasing power, he reinvests capital to make himself and his little plot of land even more productive. So he invests in buying some sort of hoe thing that you can tie to a donkey. And that makes him more productive. Then he does it again to where he invests now in a tractor so he can produce even more goods, more stuff. This is how an economy grows. Let's take it to the next step. We've got 3 more farmers. This gentleman and the society at whole has become so productive that instead of just using their own plot of land to grow everything they need and maybe sell the rest, now they're able to specialize in certain areas. But I want to point out that this became a reality because of the productivity or the producing more than they consume on their own original plot of land. It transitions from this phase over into this phase. Just want to make sure that's clear. So this gentleman specializes in producing cows, this guy corn, this guy cotton. And they are so efficient, they are so productive that they're able to provide those goods for the rest of society. So these 3 people don't have to farm. They don't have to grow their own cotton, their own corn, or their own cattle. They can buy it from the surplus that these farmers are generating due to their capital investment and their productivity. But it goes back to the original phase, which is producing more than you consume. So now this society not only has food and the cotton they need, but they also have a construction worker that can build homes. They have a teacher that can teach the children how to do other things to expand the society further. They have a doctor that helps this gentleman who is obviously eating a bad egg or something. I don't know, but he's really sick. So this guy's able to help out the sick individuals in this little community. So society, as a result of productivity, say it one more time, gets richer and richer and richer. But notice I haven't said anything about the amount of currency in this little economy, or the amount of money as most people would define it. We've just talked about the goods and services it creates. So let's assume for a moment there were 1 million currency units circulating within this economy. How rich would they be? Let me ask you another question. Now let's assume there are 100 million currency units circulating within this economy. How rich would they be now? It's kind of a trick question because it would be identical. You see, it doesn't matter how many currency units are circulating within the economy. That isn't what makes it rich or poor. What makes it rich or poor are the amount of goods and services that this society is able to produce efficiently. Now I'm going to show you what happens when you add government stimulus to this equation. And then in step number 3, I'm going to reveal how more and more stimulus gives the government more and more power, which puts us directly on Hayek's road to serfdom. Step number 2, the stimulus economy. What happens when you build an entire economy around government spending? So this is everyone's favorite, your drunk, insolvent Uncle Sam. And he comes in and he sees that there's a problem in the economy. They are all Keynesians. So the solution for every problem is nothing other than government spending. Just spend more money, create more currency units, and that fixes everything. So what he does, with the help of the Federal Reserve monetizing the debt, prints up some stimmy checks and sends them out, we'll say, to the farmer who grows the cotton. Well, this farmer gets these checks in the mail and says, "This is fantastic. Now I don't have to produce as much cotton to have the same amount of purchasing power." Because what the government, the school system, has brainwashed everyone in the economy to believe is that the amount of currency units an individual has is a measurement of wealth, or the amount of currency units in society at large is a measurement of wealth. But remember what we talked about in step number 1. It's not about the number of currency units circulating in the economy or the amount of money. It's all about the amount of goods and services the economy is producing efficiently. So what happens when this farmer starts producing less cotton? What that means is the teacher now has to grow their own cotton. So they don't have the time to teach as many students. Same for the construction worker and same for the doctor. So there's less cotton in this economy. There's fewer homes being built. There's less patients being seen. And there's fewer children who are being taught how to be productive in the future. So you see what has happened. Although we have stimulus coming in from the government, money printing, it's going into the back pocket. On the surface, it seems like that is benefiting this individual and society at large. But when you really think it through, you realize that by the government spending this money into the economy and just putting free money in the back of someone's pocket, that incentivizes them to work and produce less. Because on aggregate total, there are fewer goods and services being created, it makes society at large far poorer in the long run. So the next question becomes, to what extent is the government distorting the economy? For that, let's look at some charts and go right to the internet. Okay, the first chart I want to look at is actually a map of the United States. And this is from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. This shows us how much incomes increased by state on average in 2020 compared to a baseline in 2019. We'll go ahead and read directly from the website. State personal incomes increased on average of 6.1% in 2020 after increasing by 3.9% in 2019, according to estimates released today by the Bureau of Economic Analysis. In 2020, the increase in transfer payments was the leading contributor. And when they say the leading contributor, there wasn't even a close second. This was the reason why you saw incomes actually go up in 2020 and not down. And I want to point out that incomes on average increased by 6.1%. And you may say, okay, George, well, that's a lot, but it's not a massive amount considering it was almost 4% in 2019. But I would also point out the unemployment rate. So think about this. Incomes went up by 6%, while unemployment went through the roof. Look at these unemployment numbers from Shadow Stats. Even if you believe the government's headline number of U3, unemployment still spiked up to 15%. That's far higher than it was during the GFC at its worst point. So obviously, there's a lot less productivity. There's fewer goods and services being created, yet incomes, currency units are going up. Now let's move on to an even more shocking chart directly from the Fed. This is federal net outlays. So how much is the government spending? Look at the increase in 2020 alone. It goes completely parabolic. It's almost a straight line up. And when you look at total government spending, including state and local, the best chart I have goes up to 2018. So we have to do a little back of the envelope math. So in 2018, government spending represented about 40% of GDP. In other words, the private sector was only responsible for 60% of overall GDP. Let that one sink in a moment. Oh, but wait, there is more. In 2020, the number has increased from 40% up to 57%. So over half of our total GDP is now a result of government spending. But let's take it back to our very simple economy. Right now, we have far more currency units circulating than we did in 2019. Just look at this chart of M2 money supply. Just like the government spending, it goes parabolic in 2020. We've added almost 4 trillion currency units to the economy. So has this made us wealthier? Are we far richer than we were before? Not really. Let's look at another chart of our trade deficit. So remember in our example that we started step number 2 with, if that person didn't produce as much cotton, there'd be fewer goods and services in the entire economy. But that simple example didn't have imports. What we do now is just print up more currency units. And because we're not creating the same amount of goods and services, we just import more from foreigners who are willing to create those goods for us. But what that does is it increases the trade deficit. What do those foreigners do with those green pieces of paper we send them? They buy U.S. assets. So the foreigners become richer. The Americans in the United States become poorer as a result of producing less stuff. Step number 3, the road to serfdom. Now what I'm going to do is connect all of these dots and show you how the new COVID economy the government has created, the new stimulus economy, is a form of socialism or welfarism, which is what I'm calling it now. I think it's a better description. This leads to more government power, more government control. And unfortunately, it takes us and puts us on a path to totalitarianism. And I'm going to do my very best to explain this, along with some help from my good buddies, Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman. But before we get into the eventual end game, let's go ahead and build on what we talked about in step number 1 and 2. The economy is being built more and more on government spending. It's creating a dependency on stimulus. Now, 57% of GDP is government spending. This is making society poorer, like we talked about in step number 1. But now you're probably asking yourself, okay, George, if we have more currency units that are being created by your drunk, insolvent Uncle Sam, and as a result of what we've been talking about, this creates fewer goods and services. Therefore, society is getting poorer by my definition, but aren't we going to see consumer price inflation? What happens there? That's a very good point. But I think what's going to happen because, or again, the probability is highest. There are no certainties whatsoever, but the probability is high that because our economy gets more addicted to this monetary heroin, as Peter Schiff calls it, the less likely the government will be able to withdraw it. It's just like quantitative easing. Once we start, we've got to increase the amount we do. We can never pull it back. We saw that happen when Jerome Powell tried to reduce the size of the Fed's balance sheet and reverse the process of quantitative easing by doing something called quantitative tightening. That lasted only a short period of time where he had to reverse course because, again, the economy got addicted to the quantitative easing, just like it's getting addicted to the stimulus right now. So assuming the government cannot stop all of the stimulus checks and stimulus spending, but it's creating inflation, what can they do? For this, we need to explore an idea from one of my favorites, Russell Napier. And he was talking about this on a recent episode with my good buddy Eric Townsend on his podcast called Macro Voices. But basically, what he believes is that the government and the Fed are going to come in and try to have more control over the banking system. In the past, the commercial banking system created the additional money supply in the real economy by issuing new loans. And I've talked about that extensively on other videos. We're not going to dive into that into great detail right now. But the banking system, the commercial banking system, was responsible for creating the new money supply. Usually, that's the way it works in an economy. But if the government is creating all this new money supply through the stimulus that they're raining down on the real economy, they're going to have to restrict the amount of money creation from the commercial banking sector. And this may be why you see guys like Warren Buffett selling a large portion or large position in the banking shares that he has owned for so many years. And we've been seeing headlines about this more and more and more in the financial media. At the same time, there's so much debt in the system right now, the Fed would have to come in and institute yield curve control. We've heard about this nonstop lately. And this is essentially where the Fed is making sure interest rates on the long end of the curve with the 10-year Treasury and the 30-year Treasury don't get above a certain level. So in essence, they're price fixing or putting on price controls with the price of money itself. Think about how badly that distorts the economy. On top of that, we layer on a central bank digital currency. Even Jerome Powell has been talking about instituting Fed coin in the future. And Russell Napier also believes that if inflation continues to get out of hand after they go to all of these measures, then they'll institute outright price controls on goods and services like we saw in the 1970s. And I haven't even begun to talk about MMT. And the first step to MMT is where the Fed and the government, the Treasury, merge their balance sheet. So your drunk, insolvent Uncle Sam now has control over the printing press at the Federal Reserve. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole. It's a topic for a completely separate video. But my main point is to show you how the government is creating more and more currency units, more dependency. They're incentivizing people to stay home, not go to work. Therefore, we're creating fewer goods and services and becoming poorer as a society, no matter what the number in our bank account says. We could see the government take control of the banking system, potentially even the central bank, the Federal Reserve. I would argue they already pretty much control it. But additionally, we could see them institute price controls, and they could determine who gets credit and who doesn't get credit, because with the central bank digital currency, now instead of getting that mortgage from your local banker, you might have to go to the Fed and or the government themselves. Think about how much power that gives the central planners. And this is what puts us on the road to serfdom. For more insights, let's go right to a clip from one of my favorites, Milton Friedman.
The road to serfdom, the one we're showing here, was a sort of a manifesto and a call to arms to prevent the accumulation of a totalitarian state, to point out. One of the interesting things about that book is whom it's dedicated to. It's dedicated to the socialists of all parties, because the thesis of the book is that socialism is paving the way toward totalitarianism, and that socialist Russia at the time is not different from Nazi Germany. Well-meaning people who intend only to improve the lot of their fellows tend to favor courses of action which have exactly the opposite effect. I think, from my point of view, the most interesting chapter in that book is one labeled "Why the Worst Rise to the Top." The way the worst rise to the top is that if you're given power and you have to exercise it, you are driven by that necessity to do things that many people really would object to doing. And only those people who are willing to behave in a public capacity differently than they would behave in their private capacity are ever going to make it to the top.
So Dr. Friedman was referencing Chapter 10 in The Road to Serfdom, why the worst rise to the top. And the main takeaway there is, as the government gets more and more power over the people, it attracts people into government that want to control other people in the first place. In other words, the more power and control government has, the more it attracts people who have an insatiable lust for power, people who could potentially become dictators. It's exactly what we saw in Russia with Stalin and in Germany with Hitler. To put it into today's terms, something that every American can relate to, if you think Trump was bad, or if you think Biden is bad right now, with the government being 57% of GDP, just wait until you see the guy or gal we get when government spending is 75% of GDP, 85%, or even 95% of GDP. Every percentage point that government increases their spending in relation to GDP, the greater the probability the next ruler we have right here in the United States or sometime in the future is going to be a dictator that will take the entire country and put it under a state of totalitarianism, something straight out of a George Orwell novel like 1984. And if you don't think this is possible, one, I would say you haven't studied history enough. And number two, I would encourage you to just put yourself in your own head going back to 2019 and ask yourself if you would have believed in 6 months that the government would be locking you in your own house, not allowing you to leave, and forcing you to shut down your own business. If it can happen in 2020, why can't it happen in the future? And unfortunately, the cure or the solution that we had for the cerveza sickness by locking everyone in their home, extending government power, and creating all this stimulus check is far worse than the disease itself. And unless we wake up as a society and start thinking critically, we will go down that path, that road to serfdom, that road to hell that's paved with good intentions. For more content that'll help you build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control central banks and big governments, check out this playlist right here, and I will see you on the next video.